Hi everyone, I'm Shelley and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another Question the Narrative video, and today's topic is 14 years before the Titanic sank. Over the weekend, I learned something very interesting pertaining to the Titanic that I knew that I wanted to share with you. But first, I want to give you a little context so that you know where I'm coming from. There are certain books out there that seem to scream that there is a possibility of time travel. Or, on the other hand, there are some books out there that seem to suggest that predictive programming has been going on for quite some time. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, I'm just going to give you a couple of examples first. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Baron Trump novels. This is something that I learned about several years ago, and it's something that amazed me, but I haven't really thought about it for quite a while until I came across this information about the Titanic. So first, let's read a little bit about these Baron Trump novels, because the Baron Trump novels, they were not written about Donald Trump's son, at least I don't think so, because they were written in 1889 and 1893. But there are a lot of very disconcerting similarities between these novels and Baron Trump, who is Donald Trump's son. So let's just read a little bit about this. The Baron Trump novels are two children's novels written in 1889 and 1893 by American author and lawyer Ingersoll Lockwood. They remained obscure until 2017, when they received media attention for perceived similarities between their protagonist and U.S. President Donald Trump. And that is probably when I first heard about it. It was probably 2017. That's actually when I woke up to a lot of things, but anyway. Lockwood published the first novel, Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and His Wonderful Dog, Bulger, in 1889, and its sequel, Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey, in 1893. The novels recount the adventures of the German boy Wilhelm Heinrich Sebastian von Trump, who goes by Baron Trump, as he discovers weird underground civilizations, offends the natives, flees from his entanglements with local women, and repeats this pattern until arriving back home at Castle Trump. The novels were part of a trend in U.S. children's literature that responded to the demand for fantastic adventure stories, triggered by Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. They were, however, indifferently received and did not enter the canon of children's literature. In 1891, and I just want to point out that I've done videos about the year 1890 or the years surrounding the year 1890, and it does seem like a lot of very, very mysterious and unsettling things supposedly happened during that time. And I'll link that video to the end of this one if you wanted to look into that, because yeah, weird things always seem to happen around 1890. In fact, the house that I am living in right now was built in 1890, as were most of the houses in my town. But anyway, an 1891 reviewer wrote about one of Lockwood's novels. The author labors through 300 pages of fantastic and grotesque narrative, now and then striking a spark of wit, but the sparks emit little light and no warmth, and no one has to fumble for the story. So I just want to go back here and let's just look at the things that Baron Trump discovers. So he discovers weird underground civilizations. So some people might be thinking about the underground that people say exists under Washington, D.C. It says the Baron Trump offends the natives, and we do know that Donald Trump offended a lot of people. Flees from his entanglements with local women. I'm not going to get political at all. I'm going to say that that is what was in the news all the time. So, and then it just repeats this pattern until arriving back home at Castle Trump. Okay, so in July 2017, the books were rediscovered by internet forum users and then by the media, who pointed out similarities between the protagonist and then U.S. President Donald Trump. Jamie Fuller wrote in Politico that Baron Trump is precocious, restless, and prone to get in trouble. He often mentions his massive brain and has a personalized insult for most people he meets. Fuller also notes that Baron Trump lives in a building named after himself, Castle Trump, while the real-life Donald Trump had lived in Trump Tower for decades. Furthermore, Donald Trump's youngest son's name is Baron Trump, and Donald Trump used the pseudonym John Barron in the 1980s. Chris Ryota noted in Newsweek that Baron Trump's adventures begin in Russia. Ryota also mentioned another book of Lockwood's, 1900, or The Last President, in which New York City is riven by protests following the shocking victory of a populist candidate in the 1896 presidential election who brings on the downfall of the American Republic. The emergence of the novels led to some groups claiming that it suggested that Donald and or Baron Trump had engaged in time travel. This was often accompanied with claims that John G. Trump, a scientist and uncle of Donald, had created a time machine alongside Nikola Tesla. So very interesting, regardless of what you think about him. It's still very interesting to read what this book is about. And I actually would love to read especially Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey. That actually sounds pretty interesting. But let's move on to another example of this. Next, I'm just going to briefly go over a book called Project Mars by Dr. Wernher von Braun, who was, if you may or may not know, he was the head of NASA, and he was actually recruited by the Nazis. And so he wrote this next book that we're going to be getting into, and you all know that face, that's Elon Musk. And Elon Musk's first name shows up in 1953 book about colonizing Mars. So, I mean, it's like, okay, well, it's just his first name. Well, how many people are named Elon? And look at his company called SpaceX. I almost forgot the name of it because it shows you how little attention I pay to those sorts of things because I don't believe them. But anyway, it says, who doesn't love a weird 60-plus-year-old coincidence? As if there aren't enough headlines about Elon Musk at the moment, a connection between his name and a decades-old book that seemed to eerily predict the billionaire's involvement in Mars exploration resurfaced this week. In the 1950s, German-turned-American scientist Wernher von Braun, yes, the Nazis' leading rocket man, wrote a science fiction novel called The Mars Project. It takes place in the then-distant 1980 and features human colonists on Mars whose leader uses the title Elon. As in, oh, we don't know, billionaire and SpaceX big shot, upcoming SNL host, and guy who wants us to get to Mars? So I'm not going to read any more of that because that's basically as far as that goes. But pretty interesting that a very unusual name ends up in a book like that, which is finally when I'm going to get to the point of this video. I discovered over the weekend that there is a book called The Wreck of the Titan, or Futility, and it was written in 1898. Let's read what this book was about, shall we? Futility is a novella written by Morgan Robertson, first published in 1898. Again, we're going to go with the whole everything well, not everything, but a lot of weird stuff happened around this time period. Just pointing it out again. It was revised as The Wreck of the Titan in 1912. It features a fictional British ocean liner named Titan that sinks in the North Atlantic Ocean after striking an iceberg. I'm just going to stop right there. A fictional British ocean liner named Titan that sinks in the North Atlantic Ocean after striking an iceberg. And when was it written? Well, again, I'm going to show you. It was written in 1898. What year was the Titanic? What year did that sink? 1912. So, 14 years after this book was written. The Titan and its sinking are famous for their similarities to the real-life passenger ship RMS Titanic and its sinking 14 years later. Following the sinking of the Titanic, the novel was reissued with some changes, particularly to the ship's displacement. The first half of Futility introduces the Titan, described as the longest and fastest ship in the world that is also considered unsinkable, and the hero John Rowland, a disgraced former U.S. Navy officer who was dismissed from the service. Now an alcoholic, he works as a deckhand on the Titan. One night, while sailing between America and Ireland, the Titan crashes into a smaller ship at full speed in fog, splitting it in half. Roland, who witnessed the collision while on lookout, is offered a bribe by the captain for his silence, but refuses and vows to expose the deed once in port. The captain and the officers attempt to discredit Roland's testimony by drugging him. The next night, the ship hits an iceberg and capsizes, and only 13 people survive. Roland saves the young daughter of a former lover by jumping onto the iceberg with her. The pair find a lifeboat washed up on the iceberg, and Roland also fights and kills an attacking polar bear. So again, this is still the book. They are rescued eventually by a passing ship and brought back to England. So now let's just go down here to the similarities with the Titanic, the actual Titanic, that happened 14 years later. Although the novel was written before the RMS Titanic was even conceptualized, there are some uncanny similarities between the fictional and real-life versions. Like the Titanic, the fictional ship sank after wrecking on an iceberg in April in the North Atlantic Ocean. So, same place. Names are almost exactly the same, and an iceberg was involved. Oh, and there were not enough lifeboats for all the passengers. Same thing. The Titan would have survived a head-on collision with the iceberg, but a glancing encounter did more extensive damage. There are also similarities in size. So the Titan in the book was 800 feet long, and the Titanic was 882 feet 9 inches. After the Titanic's sinking, some people credited Robertson with precognition and clairvoyance, which he denied. Scholars attribute the similarities to Robertson's extensive knowledge of shipbuilding and maritime trend. Also, I see here that they also had in common speed and life-saving equipment. So the question that I'm wondering is, are all of these books coincidental? Is it possible that these books would be able to come so close to things, so close to truths that are here now in the 21st century when they were written decades ago, last century, I won't say hundreds of years ago, but yeah, decades ago is sufficient, over 100 years ago for some of them. Is it simply because history is cyclical? And I truly believe that. We know from Ecclesiastes that there is nothing new under the sun. The Bible tells us that history is cyclical. So is this how these seeming coincidences, which I don't believe in coincidences, how they keep showing up again and again and again? Now, there are some who will tell you specifically when it comes to the sinking of the Titanic that it was orchestrated. And we'll go over that reason in just a bit. But I mean, that could answer one possible reason. They read the book, they orchestrated it, came up with their story. But that doesn't answer the question as to what would be the point of the Barron Trump stories or even the Elon Musk book. So I cannot think of a purpose that they would need to be made up like that and then used as predictive programming. And I'm sure that some of you will have ideas, but I can't, for the life of me, think of what would be the use of that. But let's just get into why some people think this all happened with the Titanic. And of course, it always starts out with, it's a wild conspiracy theory, because, everyone that looks into things and doesn't just automatically swallow the narrative must be just a conspiracy theorist. So I don't care. I'm going to run with it. There's a conspiracy theory that links the Rothschilds, the sinking of the Titanic, and the creation of the Federal Reserve. On Friday, I stumbled across a tweet sent in reply to a prominent finance parody account on Twitter. It featured the black and white image of 3 men and the Titanic. Below each name, it says opposed new Federal Reserve Bank. The Titanic sinking happened in 1912, and the opening of the Federal Reserve happened in 1913. Was the hint that their opposition to the Fed and their deaths were somehow linked? I had to find out. I Googled their names and found that it was indeed a conspiracy theory. Websites with names like Before It's News, Disinfo, and Help Free the Earth all host versions of the story because obviously, can't you just tell by those names that they must be conspiracy theory websites? As with many other conspiracy theories, there's a transparently anti Semitic tint to the story, and the Rothschild family is implicated, as it is in almost every conspiracy theory involving money in any way. Except if you actually look into it, it finds out that they are connected to a lot of these things. But let's just move on. A YouTube video offers some additional information, hinting that the sinking of the Titanic was effectively drawn up as a recreation of a late 19th century book called Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan. The video goes on to say that by April 1912, all opposition to the Federal Reserve was eliminated. In December 1913, the Federal Reserve was born, controlled by the elite banking cabal whose ultimate agenda was to enslave humanity. The theory has been debunked pretty conclusively, and apparently there's a variant of it in which the men are opponents of the federal income tax rather than the Fed. So I never heard of that one, but I decided that I was going to search the names of the people because I was trying to find out too. Like, I think that I specifically first Googled, I shouldn't say Googled because I use DuckDuckGo, John Jacob Astor. And I'll just show you actually right now. So I use DuckDuckGo, John Jacob Astor, and Federal Reserve. And what I will show you is that, contrary to what that article says, when you Google these names, you don't automatically see these websites of all these conspiracy theorists. What you actually see are websites of fact checkers, even on DuckDuckGo, so not even Google. So we have Snopes here, and they're talking about that story. That's where I found this one. As you can notice, it was almost right up towards the top. Reuters, that's another fact checker or fake checker, depending on what you think. PolitiFact, Lead Stories, another fact check. So that's actually it's just conspiracy, fact check, QAnon. That's what you get when you search these things. So that's why it really is very, very difficult to find out if any of the people were involved the way that they were said to be, because that is what's buried. It's not these crazy conspiracy stories or websites that they claim is coming up first. It's all the fact checkers, which basically makes it impossible to find out the truth unless you have time to dig and dig and dig and dig, which the average person simply doesn't have the time to do that. So I'm just going to read to you a section of this article from history.com. Titanic created quite a stir when it departed for its maiden voyage from Southampton, England on April 10, 1912. After stops in Cherbourg, France, and Queenstown, now known as Cowes, Ireland, which I have to point out, in the book from 1898, the Titan set sail from Ireland. And interestingly, the main character of the book ends up in New York. Okay. So the Titanic, though, then the ship set sail for New York with 2,240 passengers and crew, or souls. So there we have another similarity. We have setting off for Ireland, and then the character ends up in New York, and Titanic is headed for New York. Okay. The expression then used in the shipping industry, usually in connection with a sinking on board. As befitting the first transatlantic crossing of the world's most celebrated ship, many of these souls were high-ranking officials, wealthy industrialists, dignitaries, and celebrities. First and foremost was the White Star Line's managing director, J. Bruce Ismay, accompanied by Thomas Andrews, the ship's builder from Harland and Wolff. Absent was financier J.P. Morgan, whose International Mercantile Marine Shipping Trust controlled the White Star Line and who had selected Ismay as a company officer. Morgan had planned to join his associates on Titanic, but canceled at the last minute when some business matters delayed him. So this is where a lot of the Federal Reserve theory comes in. okay? The wealthiest passenger was John Jacob Astor IV, heir to the Astor family fortune. Other notable passengers included the elderly owner of Macy's, Isidor Straus, and his wife Ida, industrialist Benjamin Guggenheim, accompanied by his mistress, valet, and chauffeur, and heiress Margaret Molly Brown, who would earn her nickname the unsinkable Molly Brown by helping to maintain calm and order while the lifeboats were being loaded and boosting the spirits of her fellow survivors. So the reason that I shared this was I just wanted to point out to you that JP Morgan, who did decide, according to this at least, at the last minute not to board the Titanic, he had much to gain from the creation of the Federal Reserve. And it is said that some of the passengers, like those that I listed here, for example, John Jacob Astor and Guggenheim and Strauss, were against the creation of the Federal Reserve. I have not been able to confirm that, though, unfortunately. So, if any of you have input on this or have looked into this, I don't know much about it. But the reason that I found it super interesting was simply because of the similarities between this book and what happened on the Titanic. What are the odds? So anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one down below. And if you like my work and would like to check out my YouTube membership, I will leave a link in the description for that, or you can just click on it right on my channel page. And I hope you have a great day.